50 years ago, some bold Christians dared to dream, believe, and trust God for a church in South San Jose. Today we celebrate their faith, work, and sacrifice. So many wonderful people have been part of the Foxworthy family. When you look at San Jose today, it's hard to imagine what life was like back in 1955. Instead of measuring distances in nanometers, they were measured in furlongs. Instead of dicing up wafers, farmers were tilling up fields. Instead of seeking solutions in a microscope, farmers were spraying for pests. In 1957, Sputnik was launched. In 2005, geosynchronous satellites provide TV, internet, and telephone services. For nearly 2 centuries, a farming community, San Jose produced a significant amount of fruits and vegetables until the 1960s. The Del Monte Cannery in Midtown was the largest employer in the city for many years. Food Machinery Corporation, or FMC, was founded in San Jose as the Bean Spray Pump Company in 1883. In 1941, the company received an order from the United States War Department for 1,000 LVTs, bringing defense contracts to San Jose for the first time. The end of World War II brought thousands of young servicemen back to America to pick up their lives and start new families in new homes with new jobs. With an energy never before experienced, American industry expanded to meet peacetime needs. Americans began buying goods not available during the war, which created corporate expansion and jobs. Growth was everywhere. The baby boom was underway. 1955 was an historic year. In Montgomery, Alabama, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a public bus, initiating the civil rights movement. And more significantly, in the south part of San Jose on June 5, 1955, 41 charter members met to establish the Foxworthy Baptist Church of Los Gatos. Foxworthy Baptist Church began as a mission jointly sponsored by First Baptist Church of Campbell, Alum Rock Baptist Church of San Jose, and the San Jose Baptist Association. In those early days, 4 families met together in the home of Don and Ellen Cosby, prayerfully believing that God would desire a new church to be established. 50 years later, we celebrate their legacy and God's faithfulness. In July 1955, a ranch house on 3 acres of land was purchased for the fledgling church and was described as follows: 3 acres with an 8-room house, a barn, drying shed, garage, and other buildings, located on the corner of Foxworthy Avenue and Quinto Way in an area with no church of any kind. It is in the center of a growing suburb with a 10-year plan to develop more homes, along with a shopping center, schools, and commercial offices. It was purchased for the whopping sum of $45,000. In 1955, Foxworthy Avenue was quite a bit different. Within a 1-mile radius of the church, almost 2/3 of the land was used for farming or orchards. Foxworthy Avenue was the main street. Hillsdale, a narrow 2-lane road, came to a dead end at an orchard just west of Quinto. The first pastor of Foxworthy Baptist Church was J.D. Bowen, who served until December 1955. Later that month, Justin Wales became the second pastor and served until November 1957, compensated at a rate of $40 per week. In those early years, the church established the Women's Missionary Society with Ellen Cosby as its first president. Olin Kirby and Don Cosby were ordained as the first deacons of Foxworthy Baptist Church. The church also purchased their first piano for $150. In December 1957, the church called Kenneth Allgood as pastor, and he served faithfully for over 12 years. On August 21, 1960, the church family moved into the first unit of new building 4 years, 3 months, and 15 days after groundbreaking. As the church continued to grow, the need for new buildings became apparent, and so in February 1963, the church voted to start the building process on a sanctuary and education building. In January of '64, the new sanctuary and education building were dedicated and put to use. The decade of the 60s was a time of turmoil as baby boomers reached puberty. The Cold War was in full swing, and the Cuban Missile Crisis caused us all to duck and cover. We wept as a nation over the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and President John F. Kennedy. We celebrated the evangelistic efforts of Dr. Billy Graham. And meanwhile, back in San Jose, God continued to be faithful, and Foxworthy Baptist Church continued to grow steadily. This growth was enhanced in June 1965 with the calling of Jerry Harris as associate pastor. In 1969, man landed on the moon. The fellowship hall was being built, and the sanctuary caught on fire. But by the end of December, the sanctuary was completely rebuilt and the congregation moved back in, celebrating his faithfulness. Under the leadership of Pastor Allgood, Foxworthy Baptist Church became one of the strongest churches in California. In 1969, the total membership was 976. That year, there were 130 additions, of which 45 were by baptism. Sunday school attendance was 413 average, training union attendance an average of 197. The 70s were exciting times around Foxworthy Baptist Church. God was blessing and the church was growing. In May 1970, Dr. Thurman George accepted the call as senior pastor, and a growing church required a growing staff, and those staff members from the 70s are still legendary around here. Sheldon Russell, who accepted the call as minister of music and adult education director in 1970, Dick Kreider, who served as youth minister in 1971 and 72, Ron Pratt, who followed in youth ministry in 1973, Joe Caldwell, who was called as staff evangelist and minister of outreach in 1974, and Ed Adams, who built upon the foundation of Jerry Harris and served as minister of education starting in July 1975. Other much-loved staff members include Donna McLemore, who served with the senior adults, John Andrews, who ministered to the college and career, Andy Walker, who followed Joe Caldwell as minister of outreach, Rick Pribernow, who developed such a great children's ministry here. Truly, the Lord has been faithful. Sunday school was flourishing and new ministries were being birthed. In October 1970, the church purchased 2 buses to begin a bus ministry. That ministry was soon bringing in over 200 children per week to Sunday school. In 1972, the church began a daily radio program, 5 days per week, 15 minutes a day. This was later followed by a weekly television program featuring the worship services at Foxworthy Baptist Church. In 1974, Martha Washington Allen opened the church's first library with 1,500 volumes. Later in the decade, the leadership torch was passed to B.R. Bliss, who along with her husband Jerry and able staff faithfully maintains the media library as one of Foxworthy's finest ministry resources. As the church grew and the facilities were filled, new buildings were needed, and so in 1976, the 3-story education building was completed and occupied. The 70s were also a time of missions emphasis. Foxworthy Baptist Church established a mission site that later became Oak Grove Baptist Church and sponsored a Hungarian mission. The tenure of Dr. Thurman George ended with the decade of the 70s as he resigned to become pastor of First Baptist Church of Gilroy. The 80s was a decade of leadership change at Foxworthy Baptist Church. Dr. William Hendricks from Golden Gate Seminary provided able interim pastoral leadership following Dr. George. He was followed by Dr. James Reimer, whose short tenure of 1 year began in 1981. In September 1982, the church called James Silvers as senior pastor. Don Fugate, who was called as associate pastor and minister of music in 1983, and David Jarbo, who was called as youth pastor also in 1983. And notable staff members from the 80s include Jeff Scott, Chris Evans, and Mark Walters, who served as youth interns or ministry interns. In the 80s, the church reached out in some innovative ways through Save Weeks, which were backyard Bible clubs done in various locations around the city, and concerts in the park. In 1984, the church began the Christmas Gift to San Jose, a large-scale musical production which was offered free to the community, first at the Montgomery Theater, later at the Civic Auditorium, and for the past 19 years in the sanctuary at Foxworthy Baptist Church. If the 80s was the me decade, then the 90s must certainly be the decade of the Internet, for the World Wide Web, born in 1992, has dramatically changed our world. The 90s is also the decade of the Clinton presidency, Gulf War I, and unprecedented economic growth. But it has also been a decade of unprecedented changes and challenges for the church. Pastoral leadership during this decade was provided by Senior Pastor Bruce Wade and Associate Pastor Don Fugate. George Weaver served a couple of tours of duty as Minister of Youth and is much loved and missed. Also, Derek Bishop served in the late 90s. Youth choirs were big in the 80s and 90s, and the Light Brigade from Foxworthy Baptist Church logged thousands of miles throughout the Northwest and Southwest, sharing the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. Missions continued to be on the heart of the Foxworthy family in the 90s, and short-term mission projects were funded and personnel sent from within the church. The Mexico mission trips, twice per year, continued to bless the people in Tijuana. Highlights from the early 90s include the Drive-Through Living Nativity, 9 scenes from the life of Christ with actors and animals that communicates the gospel story, and in the summertime, the establishment of the annual block parties, a summer outreach to our community. The faithfulness of the Lord and His people was exemplified in the note burning in 1992 as Foxworthy became debt-free. Jesus said, "Suffer the little children to come unto me, and forbid them not, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." Children's ministries have always been a priority at Foxworthy Baptist Church, and we are celebrating God's faithfulness and the faithfulness of so many leaders in Sunday school, in children's worship, in preschool and children's choirs, in RAs and GAs and mission friends, in Vacation Bible School, and in Awana. We thank the Lord for these faithful servants. And through it all, God has remained faithful and sustained His church. In May 2001, the church called John Myers as senior pastor. Foxworthy Baptist Church has also been a training ground for ministers. Rick Muchow, worship pastor at Saddleback Church, Mike Jans, pastoring in Rosamond, Frank Capio, pastoring in Salinas, Mike Studebaker, ministering in Southern California, Paul Ireland, worship pastor in Hawaii, Eric Nyberg, youth pastor in Marin, all grew up in this church family. Other leaders like Mike Riggins, associate director of the Mission Service Corps, Rodney Stutzman, pastoring in Prosser, Washington, Tim Kauk, pastoring in Arizona, Randall Ireland, ministering in Southern California, and Rick Rindy, pastoring outside of Chicago, all received their call while here in the church family. In this new decade, buildings have been remodeled and refurbished, ministries have been strengthened, and new ministries have been birthed, including an annual mission to Changsha, China. Today we are celebrating 50 years of God's faithfulness, and looking to the future, we can say the best is yet to come.